Hello, everyone. Welcome to Bible study today. I want to start Bible study today with a bit of a story. Um, while I was in seminary, I did a year of what we call vicarage. That's a 1 year internship kind of thing where students from the seminary are sent out to get some experience of what it's like to work in a congregation and all that kind of stuff. And I got sent to a place called 100 Mile House, BC, in Christ the King Lutheran Church there in 100 Mile House. That's up to the northern part of British Columbia. And there was a lady in that church by the name of Helen. She passed away just about a year ago now, I think. And Helen and I, on a fairly regular basis in the spring and summer and fall, would go golfing on my day off. We'd meet at the golf course and go play 9 holes together and had all kinds of fun doing that. And one day when Helen and I were walking around on the golf course, she said to me, "Will there be this up there?" And she kind of pointed up at the sky. And at first I didn't know what she was talking about, so I asked her to explain, and she said it again. She said, "Will there be this up there?" And she said, "Will there be golf in heaven?" And I kind of stumbled through an answer. I wasn't really expecting that morning there on the golf course, and didn't quite know what to say. Didn't quite know how to answer that question. But I think it's the kind of question that a lot of people wonder about. What is heaven going to be like? And so that's what we're going to talk about here in Bible study today. Now, I'll explain in a few minutes why I've got heaven here in quotation marks like this, why I've got heaven marked like that. But what we're going to talk about today is what is heaven going to be like? And to help us do that, just like we did a couple of weeks ago, the last time we had one of these Bible studies, we're going to use an Easter story to help us do that. So let's get to that Easter story right now, and then we'll carry on from there. So the Easter story I have for us here is from Luke chapter 24, verses 36 to 43. This is taking place on the evening of the first Easter. And right before this, Luke has told us about how 2 of Jesus' disciples had been leaving Jerusalem, headed to a place called Emmaus, and had walked with Jesus on the road and had supper with Jesus and had seen Jesus break bread and clued in that this was Jesus risen from the dead and had run back to tell the other disciples. And the other disciples had said, "Yeah, we saw Jesus risen from the dead too," or at least Peter did. And now Jesus is going to appear to all of them together. And so let's just read it, and we'll pick out some details that are important here as we go. So it says, "As they," all these disciples, "were talking about these things," well, what had just happened? These 2 disciples seeing Jesus and walking with him on the road and him breaking the bread, and Peter having seen Jesus earlier that same day. As they were talking about all of this, Jesus being risen from the dead, Jesus himself stood among them. Now, we also read about this in John chapter 20, Jesus appearing to his disciples in the first Easter evening. That's where we find out, that Thomas isn't there. And then later in the day, or later that evening, when Thomas comes back and Jesus isn't there anymore, and they tell Thomas about it, Thomas doesn't believe, all that kind of stuff. So it's that same event is going on here. Jesus himself stood among them, and he said to them, "Peace to you," which is the exact same thing he says to them in John chapter 20. But they were startled and frightened and thought they saw a spirit. So you have these disciples gathered together in this locked room. John is the one who tells us how the room is locked because they're afraid. You have these disciples gathered together in a locked room because they're afraid, and Jesus comes and stands among them. He says, "Peace to you." And Luke tells us that they're startled and frightened. They're even more afraid than they were before because they think that they see a spirit. Or maybe spirit isn't quite the right way to put it. Basically, they think that they're seeing a ghost. They think there's no way that this guy is actually back alive from the dead. They're convinced it's got to be just kind of some spirity ghost thing, not an actual physical human being. That's what they think is going on, and it's made them frightened, and they're startled by all of it. And he, Jesus, said to them, "Why are you troubled? And why do doubts arise in your hearts? Why are you startled? Why are you frightened? See my hands and my feet. See my hands and my feet, that it is I myself. Touch me and see. For a spirit, or a ghost, or something like that, a spirit does not have flesh and bones as you see that I have." And so the disciples are afraid, thinking that what they're seeing is some kind of spirit ghosty thing. And Jesus emphasizes to them, he hammers home this point, like, no, like I'm actually here in the flesh. I'm physically risen from the dead. I have a body that you can touch, that you can feel. You know, it's not like you're going to go walk up to Jesus and try and touch him and your hand is going to go whoosh, right through him because he's just some spirity thing. No, he's a human being that you can touch and feel. He's a physical human being. And when he had said this, he showed them his hands and his feet. And while they still disbelieved for joy, like now it's changed, right? They're still having a hard time believing, but it's because it's the news is so good. They're so joyful at all of this. It's just the news is too good to be true. Almost impossible to believe. It's so good. And they were marveling. He said to them, "Have you anything here to eat?" And they gave him a piece of broiled fish, and he took it and ate before them. So they thought they saw a spirit. They were afraid. Jesus says, no. Like, touch and see. I'm a real human being. And then it's like Jesus is saying, and if that's not enough for you, give me some food and watch me eat. There's nothing more physical, really, for a person to do than eat. If you have any doubt that Jesus was risen from the dead and had an actual body, well, here he's taking away any of that doubt. He says, I got teeth that can chew food, and when I chew it and swallow it, it's not just going to like drop down through my spiritual body and just plop there on the floor. No, he's got a stomach that's physically going to digest that food. So Jesus is emphasizing here in this appearance to his disciples that he is physically risen from the dead. He has a actual physical body that you can touch and feel, that can eat food just like our bodies can, and all of that. So that's the Easter story I want us to think about here as we come back to this question. Now, what will heaven be like? And this is where we got to talk about these quotation marks. Why am I putting heaven in quotation marks here? Well, it's because when we talk about heaven, there's at least two different things we can mean by that. Okay? When we talk about heaven, we oftentimes mean the place where we will go when we die. You know, that when we die, our bodies our souls are separated from our bodies. That's like the definition of death, is souls and bodies being separated from one another. And our souls, well, we say they go to, for those who have faith in Jesus, our souls go to heaven, you know, some kind of spiritual place, right? But that's not all we mean when we talk about heaven, right? When we talk about heaven, we're also talking about what we could call our ultimate destination, or our ultimate, we could say, hope. Our souls going to heaven is not the end of the story. We too often we get kind of hung up on that and say, oh, our souls go to heaven and That's what our hope as Christians really is, that our souls will be in heaven with Jesus forever. But that's not really it. The Bible actually says very little about what's going to happen to us when we die. What's going to happen to our souls when we die. Now, there are Bible verses about that, like Luke chapter 23, when Jesus is on the cross and he's talking to the thief on the cross beside him. And the thief says, Jesus, remember me when you come into your kingdom. And what does Jesus say to him? He says, today you will be with me in paradise, right? So Jesus makes this promise to the thief on the cross that you will be with me today. So when the thief has died, he will be with Jesus. And the Bible makes that point to us again and again and again and again. Same thing Paul says in Philippians chapter 1. He says to live is Christ and to die is gain. And he says he desires to depart or die and be with Jesus. He says, for that is far better. And in 2 Corinthians chapter 5, Paul talks about our bodies going home, or not our bodies, our souls going home to be with the Lord. So what the Bible tells us time and time again is that when we die, our souls will go to be with Jesus. That's what we have here. It doesn't tell us anywhere in the Bible what kind of place that's going to be like, other than it's going to be paradise. It'll be perfect. But the main thing we know is it'll be with Jesus. And that's what Paul says is far better. That's the best thing, to be with Jesus. But that is not the end of the story. That is not our ultimate destination or our ultimate hope. The Bible gives us a much bigger picture. So when we think about what heaven is going to be like, we're not just thinking about, well, what's it going to be like when my soul goes to heaven after I die? Well, that's I guess important, but the Bible doesn't really bother to tell us much about that, because the Bible wants us to be much more interested in this. What's the ultimate end of the story? And honestly, I think that's what my friend Helen was asking about. She wasn't asking about our souls being in heaven after we die. She was asking about our ultimate destination and our ultimate hope. And that's where this Easter story that I've just shared with you, Luke chapter 24, where it talks about how Jesus is physically risen from the dead, that's where this story can help us to understand what our ultimate destination, what heaven in that sense, is going to be like. Because just as Jesus is physically risen from the dead, we also are physically going to rise from the dead and are going to live in a physical new heavens and a new earth. Let's look at some Bible verses that tell us about this. This is one of my favorite things to talk about in the Bible, by the way. If you have questions about this, just even if your question is, will there be golfing in heaven? You can come ask me and we can talk about it. This is one of my favorite things to talk about. So, Philippians chapter 3. I just referenced Philippians chapter 1 here a second ago, where Paul talks about departing and being with Christ and how that's far better. But a little later in Philippians chapter 3, listen to what Paul says about our ultimate destination and hope. So he said that bit about what it's going to be like when we die, but he's got something to add here about our ultimate destination and our ultimate hope. Philippians chapter 3, verse 20 to 21. He says, but our citizenship is in heaven, and from heaven. Notice he's not saying that, heaven is this someplace that we're going to go to. No, we're waiting for a Savior to come to us from heaven. Our citizenship is in heaven, and from heaven, we await a Savior, the Lord Jesus Christ, who will, this is important, transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body by the power that enables him to subject all things to himself. And so this is why this Luke 24 reading that tells us about the physical nature of Jesus' body after he rose from the dead, that it's a body you can touch and feel, it's a body that can eat food. This is why it matters. Because when Jesus comes again, he comes from heaven to earth again, he will transform our lowly body to be like his glorious body. So just as Jesus' body, risen from the dead, is transformed to be this glorious body, and we're not talking here about looks, okay? When we talk about glorious versus lowly, we're not saying, well, Jesus, after he rose from the dead, he was a good-looking guy. He was kind of, so-so before, but he looked a lot better now. No, that's not the point, right? And we'll get the next Bible reading we'll look at will help us to understand what the difference is going to be. But he's going to transform our lowly bodies, our bodies that have been burdened and infected and messed up by sin. He will transform our lowly bodies to be like his glorious resurrected body. And he has the power to do that because he's got the power to subject all things, even death, to himself. Risen from the dead, he has the power to raise our bodies from the dead and transform them to be like his body. That's part of our ultimate hope. Our bodies, risen from the dead, transformed to be like Jesus's body. And let's look a little bit more at that here in 1 Corinthians chapter 15 now. So another one of Paul's letters. In 1 Corinthians chapter 15, this is an entire chapter about the good news that Jesus has risen from the dead and what it means for us. It's glorious. And this is quite possibly the best part of it here, right? It's close to the end, verses 51 to 53. The rest of the chapter is just great too, but this is the part we want to focus on here today. So Paul says, "Behold, I tell you a mystery," something amazing. "We shall not all sleep," and here by sleep he means die. We won't all die, but we shall all be changed. In that previous verse, he used the word transformed. But here he uses change. Same kind of idea, though. We shall all be changed. Even if we haven't died, we shall all be changed, he says. "In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. For the trumpet will sound, and the dead will be raised, imperishable, and we shall be changed." There's that word again. "For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality." So Paul's writing here about the change that's going to happen. Jesus is going to transform our lowly bodies to be like his glorious body. And the difference is that we will be imperishable. Now, when we think of perishable and imperishable, or we maybe don't think of imperishable this way, but we usually say like non-perishable. So if you're going to donate food to the food bank, you don't donate, at least not usually, perishable foods, right? Foods that can perish, that will go bad, or for lack of a better term, die. You don't donate fruits and vegetables usually, because they'll sit there on the food bank shelves and rot before somebody gets them. Instead, you donate non-perishable food items, things that won't perish, canned goods, stuff like that. Well, that's kind of the idea that we've got here. Paul's saying that on the last day, Jesus is going to come again in a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet. The trumpet's going to sound, and the dead, all the dead are going to be raised up from the ground. Their bodies risen from the dead, and they will be raised now imperishable, no longer able to perish, undying. That's what Paul means back here in Philippians 3 when he says he'll transform our lowly bodies, in other words, perishable, to be like his glorious, imperishable body. Jesus' body, risen from the dead, will never die again. It is incapable of dying again. And so will our bodies, risen from the dead. In the moment, in the twinkling of an eye, at the last trumpet, the trumpet will sound, and the dead, us, will be raised imperishable. And we, even if we haven't died, right? That's what he says up here. We shall not all sleep. We won't all die. Some of us will still be alive. Somebody will still be alive on earth when Jesus comes again. And even the ones who are still alive, they will be changed. their perishable bodies will become imperishable. For this perishable body must put on the imperishable, and this mortal body must put on immortality. It has to happen, Paul says. And so it will. This is our ultimate hope, that our bodies will be raised from the dead imperishable, unable to perish, undying, unaffected by sin, unaffected by sickness, disease, and all that kind of stuff. It will be gone. In a moment, in the twinkling of an eye, gone. And we will be changed. So, coming back to Jesus' physical body here, we rejoice to know that Jesus has this kind of body, because we know that that's the kind of body that we're going to have. So we read these stories about Jesus risen from the dead and we say, that's part of what heaven is going to be like. Heaven is going to be like me having a body like Jesus has a body that is unable to die. But that's not all. Oops, too many pages there. There we go. Another Bible verse for us to look at. So that's what our bodies are going to be like in quote-unquote heaven, in our ultimate hope, the thing that we're looking forward to, our ultimate destination. When we're there, we're going to have risen from the dead physical bodies that are unable to die. But that doesn't tell us about, well, what's the rest of that place going to be like? Now we got 2 more Bible verses here that are going to fill out the picture. We know that we're going to have physical bodies. Well, what is the place that we're living in going to be like? Well, there's a lot of Bible verses that talk about this, and I've just picked 2. But this is a good one, and then we'll get to the next one here in a second. So this is 2 Peter chapter 3, verse 13. Peter puts it rather succinctly here, tells us exactly what we're looking forward to. It says, but according to his promise, according to God's promise to us through Jesus, we are waiting for new heavens and new earth. Notice it's not just heaven. He doesn't say we're waiting for heaven or we're waiting for God to take us to heaven. He will do that when we die, but that's not ultimately what we're waiting for. We're waiting for new heavens and new earth in which righteousness dwells, which there is no more sin and there is only righteousness. We are waiting for new heavens and new earth. A new earth. Earth is an inherently physical kind of place. And God's going to make a new one. Remember, back when God made, Genesis chapter 1, God made the heavens and the earth. He made a physical place. Right? He made a physical earth with physical human beings and physical animals and physical plants and all this kind of stuff that lived on that earth. And what did God say about all of that stuff? He said it was very good. God thinks physical things are very good. Now, sin has corrupted God's very good world and made physical things problematic sometimes. We have physical bodies that get sick and die, and the physical world is full of all kinds of things that aren't good. But God made physical things to be very good, and that's why we're waiting for a new heaven and a new earth, where all the things that are not good have been made very good again. We're looking forward to a new world where all the very good that God made in the beginning is restored to its original condition, maybe even better than it was before. And we, physical human beings, live in that physical world as the physical creatures that God has made us to be. That's what that's what heaven, quote unquote, is going to be like. That's what our ultimate destination is going to be. This new heaven and this new earth where righteousness dwells. And we got one more Bible verse to look at here. Revelation chapter 21. If you want to know what heaven is going to be like, you need to read Revelation chapter 21, the whole chapter, and chapter 22. It will describe this for you. Now, you always have to remember, whenever we read Revelation, you have to be careful not to take things too literally. John, the guy who had these visions given to him by God and wrote down the book of Revelation for us, he's using figurative language, picture language, to try and describe what has been shown to him, which is honestly beyond words, right? So as we try and answer this question, what's heaven going to be like? We have to realize it's beyond what we can describe with words, and we're just kind of grasping at straws to get what we can. And that's what John's doing here. So some of the things are meant to be taken figuratively, not 100% literally, but he gives us a beautiful picture of what that place is going to be like. So he says, look, he says, then I saw a new heaven and a new earth. Just like Peter said, we're waiting for a new heaven and a new earth. Well, John says, I saw it. God showed it to me. For the first heaven and the first earth had passed away. They were gone. It was done. And the sea was no more. This is one of those spots where we got to remember that Revelation uses a lot of figurative language, right? It's not necessarily that there's going to be no water or no seas in the new heavens and the new earth. God made the seas and called them very good. But for the people in John's world, the time when John was living and writing, for the ancient people of Israel, the sea was the source of danger, chaos, and, well, ultimately, evil. That's, for them, the land was, God's gift to them, and the sea, in terms of like the ocean, the open ocean, was an incredibly dangerous place. Remember, this is long, long time before people were sailing across the ocean or anything like that. Ocean travel was extremely dangerous because the sea was out of control and was considered to be the source of, in a lot of cases, evil. And so when John says here that the sea was no more, he means evil is no more. Then I saw a new heaven and a new earth, for the first heaven and the first earth had passed away, and the sea was no more evil. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem. Just like we've got a new heaven and a new earth, we've got a new Jerusalem. Remember, Jerusalem is the city of God in the Old Testament. I saw the holy city, the new Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God. So again, this is not people going up to heaven and living with God forever in heaven. This is God coming down from heaven to live on this new earth with his people. And I saw the holy city, New Jerusalem, coming down out of heaven from God, prepared as a bride adorned for her husband. This new city that God has made, he's lowering it down from heaven, and it is decked out to the nines, like a bride on her wedding day. And I heard a loud voice from the throne, God's throne, saying, behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. The heavenly city, the New Jerusalem, comes down out of heaven, and his voice says, look, God is going to live with his people now on this new earth. He's going to live among them. That's remember what we said about, when we die, our souls go, quote unquote, to heaven. They go to be with Jesus. They go to be with God. And Paul says that's far better. That's a good thing. Well, you know what's even better than that? It's living in a physical world with our physical bodies, our souls and bodies no longer being separated from each other, which is what death does to us, but our souls and bodies being reunited together, our physical bodies being risen from the dead, made very good, imperishable, the way God intended them to be from the very beginning, and God coming and living with us on a real physical earth. That's better from being some spirity soul thing floating up in heaven forever and ever and always, isn't it? I think it is. Behold, the dwelling place of God is with man. He will dwell with them, and they will be his people, and God himself will be with them as their God. He will wipe away every tear from their eyes. They'll still have eyes, we will, that, sure, they're capable of crying, of having tears, but God's going to wipe away those tears. We still have physical eyes that can cry, but God is going to wipe away the tears. And death will be no more, because we will be imperishable. Neither shall there be any mourning, nor crying, because God will have wiped away the tears, nor pain anymore. That's what I think makes this hard for us to grasp, because when we think about things that are physical, we just naturally think, well, if it's physical, then there has to be pain, because pain and physicality, they just go together for us. But that's not how it was in the beginning. Pain came as a result of sin. That's where pain came from. And so when God has created a new heavens and a new earth where everything is very good and all that is evil has been taken away, there will be no more pain, even though it's physical. We can be physical without pain. Those two things are separable. For the former things, aka sin, have passed away, right? The first heaven and the first earth had passed away. The former things that went along with them had passed away. What this passage shows us is that heaven, our ultimate destination and hope, is this physical place where God comes and lives with his people. In other words, a place where heaven and earth aren't two separate things, like heaven is over here and earth is over here. And there's this gap in between them, and they're totally separate from each other. It's not going to be like that. When Jesus came and was born among us, it's like heaven and earth started to overlap. So you had heaven and earth. Because wherever Jesus is, heaven's there. Jesus was on earth bringing heaven to earth. But what Revelation chapter 21 and 22, if you keep going on like that, shows us is that heaven and earth are together. And God, who dwells in heaven, dwells on earth with us, with his people. And we live as his people and rejoice in the lives that he's given us as his people. And it's very good. And we're physical human beings. And there might be golf, but there might not be golf, because there's probably going to be better things for us to do than golf. I love golf, but golf can be incredibly frustrating. And instead, we will live physically as the people that God has made us to be forever. That's what, quote unquote, heaven is going to be like. If you have any questions about that, like I said, I love to talk about this stuff. So you can always give me a call. You can send me an email. You can write some comments under this YouTube video. Ask away, and I'll do my best to answer. But yeah. It's an amazing thing to think about what that new heaven and new earth is going to be like, what our ultimate hope is as Christian people, to live with God, to be his people, and to have him care and provide for our every need, and there be no more mourning, no more crying, no more pain, no more any of that stuff, just joy as God's people living in his presence. That's what we look forward to. God's peace to you.